You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Welcome to episode 91 of A Life in Ruins podcast, where we investigate the careers of those living a life in ruins. I'm your host, Carlton Govan. I am joined by my co-host, David Howe. Connor is lost in the desert somewhere, to be determined. In this episode, we are joined by Chris Johnston, who is the Operations Director and Project Archaeologist for the Paleocultural Research Group, also known as PCRG. Chris, thank you so much for being on the show tonight. How are you doing?
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I am doing all right, living the dream, as I like to say.
Cool. Yeah, I think we all try to say something similar in archaeology. we all like it in our own way. That being said, like as a kid, were you like an archaeology kid? Were you a dinosaur kid? Were you what kind of kid were you? Yeah,
sure. So I would say as kind of a history kid, but also like a people kid. I was the third boy in a family of three boys. So I got to watch my older brothers, grow up and make mistakes and observe that and know not what to do and how to get away with stuff. And then when I was 9, my mom had my sister. And so I not that they abandoned me or anything, but I just kind of floated around and did my thing. My oldest brother was 18. My sister was, an infant and I was stuck there in the middle. And so I just kind of always had a passion an interest in watching people and seeing what people do and merge that kind of with history. I definitely loved history, but when I was a kid, in middle school, I was reading books about profilers, like FBI profilers of serial killers. So this is before Criminal Minds and all those shows, and definitely reading stuff that I should not have been reading as a kid. But I just was fascinated by people and what people do, but definitely history and nature. I spent a lot of time outside fishing with my dad and my grandpa. I grew up in the mountains, so a lot of time outside as well.
Yeah. Well, now you're working for Paleo Research Group, so you're outside doing CRM, which is, I guess, all those things.
Yeah, not quite CRM, but we could dive into that later.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, did you grow up in Colorado? Are you a Colorado native, as they like to say?
I do. Not technically a native. The true Colorado natives are pretty protective of that label here. But I was born in Southern California, but moved to Colorado, to Steamboat Springs, and it's if you don't know it, it's a little ski town, not so little anymore, but up in Northwest Colorado. And I grew up there from when I was 3 till high school and beyond. Actually, I spent some years after high school living there, so pretty close to a native, almost as close as you can get, but not truly a native.
Gotcha. So what was your first experience in anthropology? Was it really when you got to the University of Colorado Boulder? Did you come to undergrad knowing you wanted to be an anthropology major, or did you come in looking at majoring in something else?
Yeah, so I graduated high school in the early 2000s, and I went to CU Boulder my freshman year, right after graduating high school. But I did not go into anthropology or archaeology or anything like that. It was just the classic, I'm going to college because everybody else is going to college. And I would think I was a communications major or something like that, and did a couple of those classes and was like, no, thanks, don't need that. And then I'd done some film work my senior year of high school with some buddies and made some films and stuff. So I switched to a film major because that's going to be useful from CU Boulder. Unless you're Trey Parker or Matt Stone, not much really happens from there. My freshman year of college was spent doing a lot of things other than school, if people can pick that up. So I wasn't super engaged in my education at that point, and I was paying my own way. So I decided to kind of took a step back and was like, I need to figure my life out. And so I actually hung around Boulder for a year and didn't go to school. I was just working and having fun, and then moved back up to Steamboat for a few years and was a ski bum, worked at a ski shop. I worked at a ski shop when I was in high school and went back and worked there and just skied a lot and hung out and had a good time. And then my brother, he owned a landscaping company in Steamboat. I went to work for him because I had nothing else to do. And so we ended up building this landscape company to a pretty sizable endeavor. We had tons of employees, and we did snow removal and landscaping and hung Christmas lights and all that. And it was all fine and well, but I totally wasn't all that happy. I was just, working to work. But we were doing a landscape project, and it was out west of Steamboat in the shale beds, and we found I was trying to plant some trees and digging these holes into this shale, and it was ridiculous. But I started to see all these like fossil impressions, right? And in the shale, and was like, wow, this is cool. Now, granted, I know fossils in shale are not archaeology, but it really like kind of brought up a memory kind of from when I was a kid, right? The history side, the science side, the nature side, but also like I think a lot of the people that have been on the podcast and that are out there, Indiana Jones was a big part of my childhood, and it's super cliche to say, but it is. And so I got done with that project and started going back to the office, and rather than doing like invoicing and billing and bids, I was like reading articles about archaeology and realized like, oh my God, this is like a career. Like someone could go do this. So I bailed out of the business, this pretty successful business, although it was right as the market and everything was crashing. So things were not trending in a good way, and ended up going back to Boulder in part because CU at the time, maybe they still do, had this thing where you could unenroll but stay enrolled for 4 or 5 years and basically come back. And I looked at my GPA and was like, if I don't come back now, I'm never getting back into CU. So I decided to bail on Steamboat and move down to Boulder with my then girlfriend, my now wife, and enrolled in class. And my first class was Anth 2000 or 2200, whatever it is, with Doug Bamforth there at CU, and intro to archaeology. And bam, I was hooked from that point forward.
Dude,
Nice.
Anth 2200 has been my TA hell the entire time since I've been here, as that's all they assign me to because I do so good in it. I'm just like, man, and I do enjoy it. Anth 2200 is a fun course, and and I know that very well. Doug still teaches that. He's still the guy.
must do a good
He's
job.
still
Awesome.
rocking. Does he still use the slide projector? Because back then he was rolling the slide deck, and this was like 2010 or something.
No, they installed in Hale overhead projectors. So now in the big lecture halls, there's 2 projectors that come down on two. My bad. Yeah, 2 on each side, and there's like a big TV screen on the top. So
Sure. Yeah.
It's been renovated since, is my understanding. So Anth 2200 with Dr. Bamforth, huh? And so that's when you decided to be an Anth major?
Yeah. When I enrolled, I became an Anth major and took that class and just kept on going. And then he talked about a field school, or what was the field school, but it was like, go do experience archaeology this next summer. And I immediately jumped at that opportunity and lined up and went up to the King site in Nebraska and near Chadron, and worked. I think it was the second year that Doug and company were at the King site, and that was my field school. And I knew, within the first day or two that this was exactly what I wanted to be, where I wanted to be, and what I wanted to do as a career. So yeah, that was that.
Man, if you ever want to come back and just start going through that Kingstite stuff, it is all over the lab. Like, he hasn't touched it since those field schools. We're kind of like, come on, man, you got to do something with this. We're at a new site. Like, we got to clear up the lab.
Yeah, the last time I was there was the bison skull in the foam jacket. Still there. That was us. Like the last day of field school, we saw this skull, and Doug's like, get it. So we just went to town and pulled that sucker out, and it's still there. That's great.
Well, good stuff. What then led you to, where was that moment where you decided to get a graduate degree in anthropology? Did you know like right away, or was there a break in between?
Yeah, great question. There was a break in between. So when I was an undergrad, I saw a flyer for the Anthro Club and a talk by a guy named Mark Mitchell, and he was going to talk about his research. He was a PhD student at CU at the time, and it sounded interesting, but he, at the end of the flyer, said, like, learn how to get paid doing archaeology. I was like, well, that's for me. So I went to the talk and ended up talking to Mark, and Mark is the research director for Paleocultural Research Group and PCRG, my current employer. But at the time, they were hiring, and we still do. We hire work study students from CU Boulder and University of Colorado Denver. And so I was still in school as an undergrad and decided to take my work study award and go work in an archaeology lab. So I did that for a couple of years. And then I was so fortunate to meet Mark, and he was such a great mentor to me and really advised me that, graduate school is in your future, but, try it before you buy it, kind of thing. And that's one of the great things about archaeology is there's so many opportunities to really dive in to see if you actually like what the work is before you do it. So Mark hired me on one summer, my first summer, as like a assistant field supervisor, and I had no business with that title, but that's what I was doing. And the summer prior, I'd worked for the Forest Service, the Route National Forest out of Steamboat. As it just so happened, I was able to get a job back in my hometown. So did a summer on a Forest Service crew, which was great, and then came back and finished school, and then stuck around PCRG as a field crew guy and did that. And I followed Mark's advice and realized I should take a year off. And so I took a year off, and but then started to think about graduate school kind of late summer, early fall. And I had the great fortune of meeting Dr. Jason LaBelle when I was still an undergrad at CU. Dr. Craig Lee took a undergraduate Paleo-Indian seminar with him, and he organized a tour out to the Lindenmeyer site that I think you had Kelton Meyer on a while ago, and he was talking about Lindenmeyer. And so Craig and Jason had this tour out to Lindenmeyer, and I went out and was able to meet Jason and got to know him. And it was really fantastic, and really liked him and was super engaged with what he was doing and his kind of mentorship and training. And so I ended up going to the Plains Conference in 2010 in Bismarck, and I gave a conference paper, my first ever conference. I gave a conference paper, and that was a wild experience. But Jason saw that paper and came up to me in the bar afterwards and said, "Hey, come to CSU, apply." And so I did. And the next year in 2011, I did that. The summer prior, I worked on a CRM crew for Metcalf Archaeological Consultants doing some mitigation excavations in Wyoming. Yeah, and then I went to CSU in 2011.
So you got to CU after Craig Lee had already left, right? Or did your experiences overlap?
He was no longer a student there, I believe, but he was like an adjunct professor. And so I took that class from him. And Mark, Mitchell, and Craig are good buds, so I got to know Craig kind of on the side as well. And then when I went to Metcalf, I worked with Craig's wife, Jenny Lee, who's a fantastic person and taught me a lot as well. So overlapped a little bit, but not as a student undergrad kind of thing.
Understand. When you started at CSU, did your blood begin to burn going from being a buff to a ram?
I wouldn't say it burned, but there's definitely a conflict there. And your undergrad, I think that's who you root for, right? I did the football games in the early 2000s at CU, back when they actually were like good. So I think in my heart I'm always a buff, but I like to think of myself as like a rough maybe, or a BAM or a bum. I don't know, one of those mixtures. I love CSU too. I do love. They gave me a lot of opportunities that I have taken advantage of. So it's both were great, but go Buffs.
Excellent, man. I wish Connor was on to hear that.
Yeah.
But he'll listen to this, so who knows. So what's your thesis end up being on while you were at CSU?
So anybody who knows Dr. LaBelle, you show up and it's a fire hose of thesis ideas that just get pumped in your face. And so I was running around like crazy. But in 2011, we went up to the Rocky Mountain Anthropological Conference in Missoula, Montana. And Jason's notorious for bringing a bunch of students and making big road trips and stopping at a bunch of sites. And we ended up going to a few different places, and we're driving by these buffalo jumps. And I remember buffalo jumps from when I was an undergrad, Doug talking about it in his Great Plains class, and was like just always fascinated by that idea. And I was talking to Jason riding shotgun. I'll never forget the moment we were driving by the immigrant buffalo jump in Montana, and he looks at me and he's like, there's a bison jump collection in the CSU repository that really needs to be reanalyzed, and kind of gave the little doggy head cock like, really? Okay, well, let's talk more about that. And so I ended up diving into an analysis of the Roberts Ranch bison jump collection for my thesis. So
I guess I'm familiar with it, but I don't know anything more about it. Could you talk about that bison jump real quick? What does it look like?
Yeah, about Roberts jump in particular.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's George Friesen has a line in Prehistoric Hunter-Gatherers of the Northern Plains. I'll probably butcher exactly what he says, but he says you could stand at the Roberts Buffalo Jump and look north and go from jump to jump all the way to Canada. So what he's saying there is the Roberts Ranch Jump is the southernmost bison jump on the plains. At least that dates to the late prehistoric. There's bonfire shelter, that's Paleo-Indian age jump. Maybe there's some contention about that, but what Frisen's saying is that's the southernmost late prehistoric jump. And so it's in Larimer County, kind of 15, 20 minutes north of Fort Collins, kind of near the town of Livermore. It's on private land, and it was excavated in the 1960s and early 1970s by avocationals and some folks from CSU.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I can tell you more later, but
yeah, no, absolutely. We'd be excited to bring this into the second segment. So everyone stay tuned. We're going to be right back with episode 91 with Chris Johnston.
Welcome back to episode 91 of the Life in Ruins podcast. 9 away, guys. Speaking of 9 episodes away, if you guys are listening to this podcast on, let's say you're listening on iTunes, there's the All Shows feed, and then there's like the Alive in Ruins feed. We're curious to know which one you are listening on. If you could let us know, like on Instagram, or shoot us an email or something.
Please listen on our feed. It's much easier to track metrics if you listen directly to our show rather than the All Show. All Shows feed's great, but take that extra step and follow us on our feed. That's all we're asking.
I think the All Shows feed too, like it might just be people automatically downloading, but if that's where you're getting it, yeah, try to look at us on like actually on Ruins. I think on Spotify, it's pretty easy to do that as well. But yeah, so we're back, let's see, with Chris Johnston. I don't think we mentioned this earlier, but the guy used to be the assistant state archaeologist of Colorado. He had all that cool stuff to say in the first segment, but just so you know, he is officially cool in that sense. But we're going to talk more about that buffalo jump before we get into, what you do for a living. So you want to continue that?
Yeah, sure. So the Roberts Ranch Buffalo Jump, a little backstory. It was the first excavation there was in 1966 by a group of avocational archaeologists led by a guy named Ray Barker. And they were contacted by the landowner at the time, and the family still owns it. The Roberts Ranch is a centennial ranch in Colorado, so it's been owned by the same family for over 100 years. But Evan Roberts was the patriarch at the time, and he contacted these guys because he had changed the course of a stream that ran through and exposed all this bone. So they went out and did some excavations there. But, it's avocational, the 1960s. The records aren't that great. So in 1969, a guy named Jim Judge, who many folks may know, he's most known for being a Southwestern Paleo-Indian guy, and maybe also known as being the father of Mike Judge, the creator of Beavis and Butthead and Office Space, and on the great cult classic Idiocracy, which
I thought I heard that name,
is prescient to the current time. So Jim came to CSU like right out of getting his PhD, or he was still working on it, but he sent some students out in 69 because he heard about this buffalo jump, and they went and tested it. And then in 1970 did the first CSU field school at the Roberts Ranch Buffalo Jump, and they were also at a site called Fort Vasquez. It's a trading post and kind of just east of I-25. So they did that, and then Jim bolted to New Mexico, and Elizabeth Morris came on to CSU in 77 or 71, but a guy named Max Whitkind wrote his master's thesis on the Roberts Ranch Buffalo Jump collection. So Max's thesis was published in 71. But if you kind of look at the history of bison jump research, or bison kill research, really, it's like just taking off in the late 60s to early 70s. And Friesen and Chuck Greer and others, haven't really cut their teeth into it yet. So Whitkind's thesis was kind of one of the first documents published about bison jumps. There's some earlier stuff, of course, but so this collection was sitting there. Max published his thesis, and it's cited here and there. And like I gave you that quote of Friesen from Prehistoric Hunter-Gatherers of the High Plains. But when I took over looking at the collection, we kind of settled on that as my thesis idea. I was looking at it and seeing all the new methods that had been developed since 71 on how to analyze bone beds and how to analyze faunal remains and what we know about jumps. So my approach was to kind of take those new methods and apply it to an old collection. And for, budding graduate students out there are a ton of collections sitting on shelves that are in need of things like this. And you don't need to go do your own field work and dig more holes. There's so much stuff out there to do. And so that's what I did. And I dated it. The site had never been dated, and did some spatial analysis of the bone assemblage and discovered that there was a bunch of fetal bison bone in the assemblage. Actually, it's now kind of one of the largest fetal bison assemblages that we know from a kill site. Kind of the quick and dirty, the site dates to the radiocarbon dates of course, hit the plateau, but somewhere in the 1600s probably. There's no like metal cut marks, so I argue that it's on the lower end of the range that I have for that reason. There's no trade goods or anything present there, at least that we know of. It's got pottery and chipstone tools, butchery tools, broken arrow points, tri-notched and side-notched arrow points, and then I did some spatial analysis and kind of could sort of using different elements of the bison, kind of figure out what was most likely kind of the processing area and what was most likely the kind of initial kill zone. So you've got the bison coming over the cliff to their demise, but you need to kind of pull them apart and get them out of there, and you want to get the good stuff, good elements, the long bones that have good marrow and meat and ribs and things like that. So I could see kind of a difference in where the elements were across the site. They did 4 10 by 10 foot excavation squares, but a lot of the struggle early on, at least, was trying to figure out like their grid system and how it all worked. There were not very good notes on any of that, and so it took a lot of time to determine kind of even how to think about the site spatially. But once I was able to crack that code, the data were quite good, so I was able to reconstruct a lot of what they did in the excavation.
Gotcha, man. That's awesome. I know I couldn't imagine what it would be like to have to go back through some avocational archaeologist kind of notes. Like I'm still trying to wrap my mind around some of the stuff Dennis Stanford did back in 70, 73.
Yeah.
So I can't imagine, man, what that was like. But 1600s, man, that late for a bison jump?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, you look at the range of bison jumps, they really start to take off. They show up in the middle Archaic here and there, head smashed in. It's got an early use, but then it kind of peters out. And really the bison jumping flourishes kind of in 1000 AD. That's when it's like just becomes, Kehoe has this line, and Bamforth also, this industrial scale of bison hunting around that time. And so it's not uncommon. The thing with Roberts is it's the concentration of bison jumps are to the northern Wyoming, Montana, Alberta. That's where they're really kind of concentrated. Judy Cooper's dissertation in 2008, she really lays out kind of where these sites are concentrated. And so it's definitely a cultural thing, no doubt. But yeah, 1600s is not unheard of. And I uncovered a quote when I was doing my research about, I think from Fawcett, and he referencing something from an ethnographic thing from the early 1900s and talking to an Arapaho chief about watching a bunch of Arapaho folks drive bison over a cliff somewhere in Colorado, where we don't know, but so it's not unheard of for sure.
That's who I was thinking immediately of, like, who could have been at Roberts Ranch, and like Arapahos came out of, from the north kind of late. And I know that area of the plains has a lot of bison jumps. So I was just kind of curious to see, like, were they bringing that style of bison procurement with them as they came down to the Front Range?
Yeah, it wouldn't shock me, man. The one perplexing thing at Roberts is there's two different types of pottery there. There's like punctate, kind of fingernail impressed pottery that is most often associated with the Utes, and then there's pretty complete. There's a picture of a pretty complete Intermountain wear vessel that is most kind of associated with the Shoshone peoples. So both those types of pottery appear to be showing up there. So it's a little kind of, it was a thing that as I was doing my thesis was like, man, I got to get this done. I was already way behind. I'd had a kid and like needed to just be done. So I abandoned trying to investigate that anymore, because as you all know, answering questions opens up 100 more. And so I had to cut the cord at some point.
Fair enough, man.
You said like it was an industrial scale, like bison jump, like processing, like that's I don't think a lot of people realize how much bison was like consumed out west. Like you can't stick a shovel in the ground without finding bison bones.
Yeah, if there's one thing that people that lived on the plains for the last 13,000 years did, it was hunt bison. They were doing that, but within the last 1,000 years, it does just turn into this industrial scale, hundreds and hundreds of bison. Roberts isn't like that. There's I have an MNI, a minimum number of individuals of 19 plus an MNI on the fetal bison of 8. So pregnant cows were done, and we did some seasonal studies, and it looks like it's probably late fall to midwinter season of death. So which tracks with what we know about bison kills typically.
Wow. Fair enough, man. Well, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
And I'd love to talk more about it. However, I do want to talk more about Paleocultural Research Group, PCRG, who you work for. So what is the purpose of PCRG? Like what it is, you mentioned earlier to David, it's like not quite a CRM firm, but it's not university. Like what is PCRG?
PCRG, I guess I'll start by saying I have the best job in the world because I work for PCRG. So
Nice.
PCRG was started about 25 years ago by a guy named Stan Ayler, who's pretty well known for work on the plains and lithic technology and lithic analysis. And so Stan and a guy named Carl Falk and another guy named Eric Filer, they started PCRG as a way to do research and education. So that's kind of our tagline. We're public archaeology, research, education, Great Plains, Rocky Mountain archaeology. That's kind of the 10-second elevator pitch of who we are. But when you burrow into it a little bit, we're a member-supported organization. So we have a membership roster, a few hundred people kind of support our mission. And we do research and education. So outreach and public talks and research projects. We do a whole variety of things, management plans, collections work, but our bread and butter is working with varying agencies, Forest Service, Park Service, BLM, federal agencies, and state agencies like the state of Colorado and state of North Dakota. And we organize 5 to 7 field projects most summers. These projects are funded in a variety of ways, mainly grants, and we take advantage of Colorado's State Historical Fund, which is a really great grant program that folks, if they're not familiar, should look into it. And we get grants to go do research. We do a lot of excavations. That is kind of our bread and butter. What really is our shtick is we invite people to come on our projects. And by people, I mean anybody. It could be someone who's never done archaeology before, but has a real passion for it or an interest in like, gosh, I've always wanted to do this. And so a lot of retired folks or near retired folks who, when they were kids, wanted to be an archaeologist like we are, but, became accountants or lawyers or whatever. So they come out and volunteer their time with us. Professional archaeologists take a busman's holiday and come out and do some fun work with us. Students, we get a lot of students and recent grads trying to get a little more experience. And we take them out, we feed you, we give you a place to put a tent, and we give you all the tools you need. So all you need to do is bring your own camping equipment and come on out, and we train you on everything. We have really good kind of protocols to ensure that things are up to professional standards, but it allows people an opportunity to experience archaeology and do it. And so when you said CRM, we don't really do CRM. We're not out bidding on pipeline surveys or things like that. Kind of the world we live in a lot is Section 110 of the National Historic Preservation Act. So a lot of people are probably familiar with Section 106, right? That's what fuels a lot of contract archaeology and pipelines and wind farms and cell towers and all that stuff. Section 110 is a piece of the National Historic Preservation Act that has federal agencies set out some goals and guidelines to manage their resources. So the Forest Service, they're a land managing agency, and each forest has property that has cultural resources on it, and they need to manage that. But oftentimes they don't have the staff, the funds themselves to do it, the time. Really, the time's probably the biggest thing. So they bring in us, and we cobble together funding, and we go do projects. So like an example, I'm working with the Route National Forest on a number of projects, but most recently this past summer, we did year 2 of excavations at a The Windy Ridge Quartzite Quarry is a massive quartzite quarry in the Rocky Mountains outside of Steamboat, which is kind of cool for me. It's like my old stomping grounds, and I'm getting to do archaeology there. And they needed to know kind of how big the resource was, how far it extended away from the quarry itself. And so for 2 years, we brought a team of 10 to 15 volunteers, actually like 15 to 18 volunteers over 2 different field seasons, and did some surveying and some testing and collections work on Doug Bamforth worked at the site in the early 90s, and I have his collections, and I'm kind of reanalyzing them. And so that's just an example of one project we do. We also do a ton of work up in North Dakota on mostly Plains Village archaeology. Research director Mark Mitchell, who I mentioned earlier, that's his dissertation research, and he's kind of the leading scholar, I guess, on Plains Village archaeology. We work with the state of North Dakota on a lot of those sites as well.
Do you guys work with MHA at all on those sites up there?
We do, yeah. We've had some MHA folks come and work with us on the projects, and then, of course, all the conversations leading up to the projects, MHA is heavily involved. Mark's really good about reaching out to 3 affiliated and getting them on board. And we want to do more, for sure. There's always more to do. There's always more outreach to do with Indigenous folks, but it's sometimes a tricky road to hoe. Not everyone, wants us there for they have totally valid reasons for that. And there's definitely a marriage somewhere in there of archaeology and cultural history and your own culture, for sure.
We might get Mary Baker at CU Boulder. She's thinking of coming here for grad school.
I know. I love Mary. Mary's been with us on a few projects. Yeah, I love Mary.
Yeah,
Mary made the best wasp trap I've ever seen in my life. We were at a campsite up in North Dakota, and we were just getting pounded by these wasps, and she made this
for a moment I thought you were talking about white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. For a moment I was like, what did she
maybe that too.
Actual wasps,
wasps, stinging bugs. Yeah,
gotcha. Yeah,
I love Mary. That's great.
Excellent.
The other one, you would just get Mumford and Sons CD and put it there.
Hootie and the Blowfish.
All that aside, though, I think I didn't know you guys did that with all the volunteer work and stuff like that, and that's awesome. Because my first introduction to archaeology field work was at the Topper site, which was it was just all retired people that wanted to be archaeologists as well, now doing it, on the side and enjoying it. Like, I learned to dig from them. But yeah, it's like that atmosphere is really fun, because then everybody is excited about archaeology. And I imagine CRM for me can get kind of like grueling, and you're like, what am I doing? But like in what you guys are doing, that's got to be awesome, because you just got fresh.
I think you really hit it on the head there, David. Like one of the best, my favorite thing is going out to the field with all these volunteers, because sort of unlike a field school, they don't have to be there. They're making the conscious choice that they want to go, and they can leave at any time. And so it's just so much. We have such a great cadre of volunteers, and we get to meet new ones every. That was the hardest part of 2020. We had to cancel the field season and missing all of our friends out there and everything. So super happy to get back this year. But I think you really nailed it right there, David.
Cool. Well, on that, let's put a nail in this segment. I can't do Connor's job. All right, we'll come back on the next one.
Welcome back to Life in Ruins podcast, episode 91. We're here with Chris Johnston. So as you guys know by now, the third segment, we always like to allow this space for our guests to talk about something that they're passionate about. And Chris had a fantastic suggestion, something that we haven't really talked about yet on this podcast in depth, but kind of talking about how archaeology can often bring us into the micro scale of the past, like counting flakes, measuring tools, quantify faunal remains. And we just kind of end with doing statistics and basically being bean counters. What's your opinion of that, Chris? Like how can we do better then?
I don't know if I can tell us how we can do better, but I do. I think about this a lot. Like one thing I'm super passionate about and is trying to zoom us back out. And I'm just as guilty as you two and probably everyone else out there is. We have timelines and budgets and projects and compliance reports, and the pipeline needs to get in, and we do the things we have to do, right? We present the data, we report the data and get it out there. And I often think, like, what more should we be doing? And you look at like National Historic Preservation Act, right? That's 1966. That's just been the driver of archaeology for the last 55 years now, right? Where are we going to go with this at some point, right? I do public archaeology. I say I do public archaeology, but what does that mean? Like, all archaeology is public, right? Most archaeology is funded by public funds, right? And
Yeah.
grant agencies and land managing agencies, and what can we do? So I often just dream about, and again, I don't have anything to hang my hat on necessarily, but like zooming us back out and trying to connect these dots now, 50 some years later, of all these sites and collections we've dug up and dealt with and presented and analyzed and ran every chi-square p-test, you name it, on it. How do we put it together? And one thing I often think about is my work with Bison jumps and doing a lot of background research on that. And like I talked about earlier, they really kind of get to that industrial scale, 2,000, 1,500 years ago. They're just, the people in the West, probably the Blackfeet or the ancestral Blackfeet, are just jamming bison out. Bison kill after bison kill, hundreds and hundreds of bison. And there's no way they could be eating all of that and utilizing all of that. And this marriage between what I've gotten into more recently with my work at PCRG and Mark Mitchell at Plains Village sites, and thinking about, you've got these villages, these massive villages kind of down the Missouri, and then you go up the Missouri and you've got these massive bison kills. And just in my head, there's no way you can tell me that there's not some link there, right? There's just got to be. But how do you prove it? I think you got to go find the data and do that. If I did a PhD at some point, which I'm not going to do, at least not in the near future, semi-near future, it would be around that topic, like trying to dig into, is it isotopic data and bison teeth? Is it corn, pottery, language? How do you merge that? I don't know. But I think we can get so focused on the minute details in archaeology that we lose kind of the whole point of what we're trying to do, right? Which is to investigate the past. I don't know. What do you guys think?
We get a little too processual these days, I think.
Yeah.
And Carlton said, like bean counting, and it's like MNI is great. Like we need to know how many bison are there, like determining seasonality and stuff like that's awesome. But like the more holistic stuff, I think, is more of what will save archaeology, I guess, like applying it to, why does it matter to you? Like, does the public care about how many pieces of debitage or how much reduction there was on this biface? Not really. But like the people there making the biface, like what their daily life would have been like, I don't know if that answers it or not, but
I don't know. I think I brought it up a couple times on this podcast. Like something that I've kind of really grown to envy about the European system of archaeology is that it's under history. And when you have archaeology as history, it tells a different story than archaeology as anthropology. Like I'm totally all for the four fields approach. Do not get me wrong. But kind of when you do it to understand human behavior, you're using your site or your group of sites as a case study in comparison to the rest of the world, rather than trying to tell the story about the people that lived at that site. And so, like a lot of my work, I'm trying to relate the past back to the Northern Caddoans, right? Like that's what I'm trying to do, is like try to find my people's past so I can write it as like, this is our history. And then the further you go, like, I grew up with David in Paleo-Indian land, and it just, something I kind of noticed is but they're going to kill me if they hear this, because I know Todd listens to this podcast in the field. But what's the point? At the end of the day, like, I don't understand. Like I read Paleo-Indian stuff and I'm like, okay, this is just like you said, Chris, like this is just another site. I'm just looking at tables of the debitage they found, the bison they found, the ochre they found. But like, what is this telling us about human history and human behavior, other than like we have another site and I have all the statistics to tell me based on what they found, where they got their lithic material from. But
so what?
Exactly.
Yeah. Where's the people, the people piece of that story? And I think, it gets harder and harder, as you alluded to, Carlton, as you go back in time, like linking the person, the face of who made that tool to that tool just gets harder and harder for us to do as archaeologists. But I think about when I'm out in the field with a bunch of volunteers, and we've got folks that have never done archaeology before, and they're excavating and they hear that, that tink, right? That trowel on a piece of chert, and you get that familiar sound. And for me, it's like, okay, another flake. But these people are going nuts. Like, oh my God, look at this. And rightly so, right? We all had that experience when we first started out. And then, they say time and time again, like, wow, I'm the first person to hold this in, 1,000 years or 5,000 years or whatever, right? And so I think about that connection to like people today and people to the past, and we have that link right there in the like kind of the discovery. And I hate to couch archaeology in like the discovery, but at the end of the day, that's kind of what it is. And just seeing them so excited. And I think we just got to be careful. We have to really think about what it is that we're doing and the story we're telling on multiple fronts, right? We have to bring in Native folks into that discussion more than we do. And, certainly things are better now than they were 10, 15, 20, 50 years ago. But there's certainly more work to do and hearing their perspective on those flakes. And do they care how many, you got 10 flakes of this chert and 15 flakes of that quartzite? Like, neat. They probably don't care. But also at the same time, like thinking about the broader view of archaeology. And, Carlton, you bring up the Paleoneolithic piece. Certainly that gets all the National Geographic articles because it's cool, it's interesting. I don't deny it, but when we're always in search of the earliest or the first, right, you're never gonna. I think I was listening the other day to Heather Rockwell's piece, and she was saying something about like you're never gonna find the oldest or the first, and like I almost drove my car into a bridge embankment because I couldn't agree more. Like we're never gonna know. Seriously though, like we have to keep that in mind. The public doesn't know that, right? But in our minds, we have to know like this isn't the oldest. It can't be the oldest because how do you know it's the oldest, right?
Right, and I think in the Paleo-Indian sense too, like it's sexy would be the word because it's the oldest group in the country, and it kind of connects them to the old world a bit, like where humans migrating, coming into the Americas, and it's like whether this is how humans got here, but like there's only so much. So like some sites are different. You got quarries, now there's like a mammoth kill site, and you learn a little bit more about like how that day to day was, but like it at the end of the day, like there's other more interesting sites like bison kills and things like that are like super interesting, or like contact era sites, like where they start getting horses and things. Like, we definitely get a little too focused on certain ones, but then that generates interest in the field. And like I got into the archaeology because of that. Also Indiana Jones. I have no shame saying that. Yeah. But like, I don't know. It's tough because we all have our little like fascinations with history, but that's like the thing everyone does. And I had another point here, but picking up the flake and stuff like that, or a biface. It's like that was that person's pocket knife 10,000 years ago or 7,000 years ago. And like it's intimate picking it up, but it just becomes too much of a report. Like, there's X amount of tertiary flakes and I don't know how to change it.
Yeah, I don't either. I guess my only point is, and I like, trust me, Todd, if you're listening, I'm not dumping on Paleo-Indian archaeology, but
we can shit on it. It's all right.
there's at a Clovis site, what you get, a Clovis base and a few flakes, and like that's a good day. Mm-hmm. But then we like gloss over these like. Right, like North Dakota, ancestral Mandan Hidatsa villages, these towns where these people lived, and like
I'm so happy you said towns. That makes me so happy you said towns.
Or they're practically cities in some, like Double Ditch, man. That's a metropolis. There's like the things are happening there, right? And you can't. Like
I left Wyoming, and I don't know a single thing about how like a Shoshone site is formed or what it mostly looks like or how many people were there, but I worked on like several sites where I mapped them, and like that's a good point. Like I just everything else is kind of overshadowed.
Well, it's part of the ephemeral record too of hunter-gatherer archaeology, and there's absolutely nothing we can do to rectify that. Like people who have a soft imprint on the landscape are going to leave a soft material culture. Well, not soft material culture, that's gone, but like a limited material culture, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it balances out because they make more sites, right? Like that was the big, I think like back in the 60s, that was the thing, like, well, hunter-gatherers are going to be overrepresented. But as you said, Chris, like, but they're very ephemeral. It's hard to find them. They make more, but it's hard to find them all. So it kind of, evens itself out a little bit in that regard. But
and I think people are moving in that direction. Like your advisor and my undergraduate advisor, Doug Bamforth, he's got that a 2011 paper in American Antiquity, and he's like trying to connect some of the dots at least and tell a bigger story. And like Bob Kelly, like he's fantastic at that. Like let's start, but it's dangerous, right? You get some of these big data sets and you can veer off into some pretty bad directions quickly if you're not careful. But you can also kind of irritate a lot of people by making large sweeping claims. So it's tough. I think we could learn a lot from as a plains archaeologist. I often look to the millions of Southwestern archaeologists that are down there and got some massive data sets and doing some really cool, innovative things. And I try to talk to my brethren on the plains about like, let's use these methods, or let's think about this, social network analysis or Turkey as proxy for human migration. Like, damn, that's fantastic, Yeah. And finding ways to do that on the plains.
But that the thing with the plains is like I can name most of the people that work along the Missouri River. There's like you, Mark Mitchell, there's Travis Jones, me, Doug, you have Ritterbush, Adair down south. Like there's just no one working in the plains.
Totally.
Like, Doug, for me, Doug and his new student and Dr. Carlson, like Nebraska is our playground for the Plains Village period. Like no one's there.
Yeah.
No one's looking at it. And we are working on that initial coalescent variant site. And you guys are just up the river from us working on, a little bit later stuff. There's just no one to do any of this work. It's kind of like, it's cool that we have it as our own playground, but there's just so much to have to deal with that it's like, you can spend a career looking at a lot of this stuff like the Southwesterns do. And we just don't have that data set. Yeah,
we don't have I think you nailed it. We don't have the people. So if you're a budding graduate student or undergrad and you're looking to make a niche, come to the plains. There's the world is wide open and we need more people. And it's something, I'm on the board of directors for the Plains Anthropological Society. And it's something we talk about a lot, actually, like looking at our universities on the plains or plains adjacent universities and, faculty that came in the late 70s, early 80s, they're mid 80s, they're retiring, they're moving on. And those positions aren't getting filled by plains archaeologists. They're getting filled by people doing work in Mesoamerica or, that get the National Geographic shows. And so I think, at least from the plains perspective, we need to really start talking about these bigger issues, these bigger pictures and connecting these dots and telling a bigger story, or else we're dead in the water. I mean,
yeah, there's like no plains school anymore. Like you'd think UNL or, University of Nebraska, Lincoln or Kansas, but, most of what is it like University of Wyoming has one of the highest registration, like people in plains per university.
Yeah. In the society, I think Colorado and Wyoming are the top two.
And we're periphery. OU is a periphery. Like all these schools on the edge of the plains are kind of plains programs, but Doug's the only one that does plains here as a faculty. Marcel, Bob Kelly, like, they're in Northwest Plains, but they go to RMAC.
Sure. Yeah. They're mountain folks. And you can't talk about the plains without talking about the mountains.
Yeah.
And right, like, and that's the whole point of what I kind of am saying is like these things are all connected, right? Like Lewis and Clark didn't show up at Awatiha Village in North Dakota in the early 1800s and be like, God, I hope we get lucky and make it over those mountains. Like they knew. They were talking to the Mandans and Hidatsas, and like they knew where to go. They knew how to get there. And it wasn't by chance. Like there is a bigger story. There is a bigger connection there. We just have to burrow in and take some risks, I think, and tell it and engage more people in plains and mountain archaeology, or else we're gonna be in a bad spot.
I
we should
agree,
get a
man.
Lewis and Clark guy on here, or girl.
One,
that
yeah,
knows
dude.
about
Yeah,
that.
I have an idea
cool
for a guy who
sport.
likes mountain men and knows a lot about the mountain man meetups.
Oh, that'd be cool.
Yeah.
That'd be a good one. But there's that damn cat again. Go ahead, go, David.
I guess a quick plain story, and this is something I did learn in Wyoming, is like I was working for Swika out in the desert. I forget where, not desert. I don't know. It was just like a sagegrass sea, classic Wyoming. Looking for flakes on the ground, mapping them. And then I found like one of those rolled can lid jingle dress things.
Oh yeah.
Bells.
And I didn't
Tinklers or
jinglers or whatever they are. Yeah, and I didn't know what it was. Like I knew it was a rolled up can, but I was like, I guess they were just messing with it. And the PI I was with was like, no, like they used this to like because it was illegal to use the elk teeth jingles, so you had to use they rolled up the cans and stuff, and I was like, whoa, that's like really cool. And I just like shoved it into a bag and was like, next, like went to the next site. But yeah, like that kind of stuff. It's just like there's so much history right there, and like the whole cultural exchange, and yeah, like so cool. And that was like some girl's thing right there. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. And I think like kind of as Chris saying, like there's some really cool stuff on the plains. Like, you know, it's not easy archaeology like the Southwest where it's up and around you. You got to dig for it. But like we're like the places that me and Chris work and others where we have these massive towns and we could use some help. Like plains archaeology is meaningful. It is a space in between the Southeast and Southwest. And there's just so much going on from these massive, like a bison or a mastodon, mammoth kill in Wyoming covered in ochre to these massive fortified palisade towns in North and South Dakota. There's some cool stuff on the plains and we could use some more people. Find your niche.
I second that.
Yeah.
Oregon Trail, like all that's out there. Yeah.
You know, all the trails have to go through the plains. The plains is just that spot, man.
Yeah.
And, you know, excellent. Good stuff. Well, before we end the show, Chris, what are a couple sources? These could be books, articles, or videos that you would recommend for anyone interested in the topics that we've discussed tonight?
Yeah, certainly. So if Bison jumps kind of were your jam, you got interested in that, obviously you could look up my thesis, although it's a thesis, so don't pillar me for it. But Jack Brink has a really great book called Imagining Head Smashed In, and Head Smashed In is a really neat site, and this book's like super publicly accessible. It's designed for the public, so highly recommend that. And then to kind of get at what we were just sort of talking about, like connecting some of these dots, I love Doug Bamforth's 2011 American Antiquity article. The name of it's escaping me, but you'll maybe put it in the show notes or something. It's a great piece. And then Mark Mitchell, a PCRG research director, his dissertation was turned into a book, and it's accessible, but it is academic-y. It's called Crafting History in the Northern Plains, Political Economy of the Heart River Region, 1400 to 1750. It's a super great resource, kind of the most up-to-date on Plains Village archaeology out there.
Up on the Missouri region, yeah.
Yeah.
I've been meaning, I have that book. I read it when I first got to Boulder, and I've been meaning to get him to sign it. But yeah. I love the work you guys are doing up there. I think you guys are doing a fantastic job, and it's really fun to kind of watch it.
Where can your listeners find you or find Paleocultural on the webs?
On the interwebs, yeah. So I'm not super active on social media myself, and if you've sought me out, you'd see a bunch of pictures of my kids. But Facebook, look up Paleocultural RG, as in Paleocultural Research Group, or just search PCRG. We're out there. Instagram, our handle is Paleocultural, and then my personal Twitter, which is not super active, is CM Johnston 8. Cool.
If you had the chance to do research /CRM /academic right in the middle archaeology with volunteers again in ruins, would you?
Of course, man. Yeah. I like I said earlier, I have the best job in the world of archaeology, and it's opened up so many doors, and I met so many great people and so many good lifelong friends through archaeology, and that aren't just archaeologists. And so totally 100%.
Awesome.
Excellent.
I'll have to come out there.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we just interviewed Chris Johnston. You can find him and Paleocultural Research Group, PCRG, on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. You can find the links to those handles as well as his literature and media recommendations in the episode description, whatever service you're listening to this podcast.
Again, if you're listening on the All Shows feed, why don't you move on over to the regular A Life in Ruins feed? And while you're at that, if you're on the the app already, meander on over, give us a review. 5-star, 1-star, whatever you want to do. Just give us some kind of text in there to appease the algorithm.
And with that, we are out. Thanks for listening to A Life in Ruins podcast.
You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook at A Life in Ruins Podcast, and you can also email us at alifeinruinspodcast@gmail.com.
And remember, make sure to bring your archaeologists in from the cold and feed them beer.
Why did the naive Bayesian suddenly feel patriotic when he heard fireworks?
I have no idea, man.
I don't know.
He assumed independence.
Oh, God.
I don't understand that joke.
I get it. I get it. That's great. That's fantastic. That is I'm gonna have to send that to Eric.
I can't think of anything else though.
Excellent.
Yeah, no Connor, no good dad jokes.
No
I got a good
dad
dad joke.
Oh, let's hear it. Let's have a guess of a joke.
You're a dad.
It's a terrible dad joke, but what would you call it if every car in the nation was pink?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
It'd be a pink carnation.
Oh.
Boom! Terrible dad joke for the win.
That's great. Thank you, Chris. And with that, we are out.
This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Culturo Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network. And was edited by Chris Webster and Rachel Roden.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.